I shut my window and startled the flock of crows outside my house. They always want to be my friends during these videos. Hello BookTube, it's Leah here, and today I want to talk to you about two things. First of all, how I rate books, and secondly, how I review books. So starting with how I rate books. Occasionally, I will pick up a book, like a nonfiction book, that I'm reading to educate myself about like a social or a political issue, or because I'm trying to do research for a book that I am writing. But for the most part, I'm reading for fun. I'm reading to have fun, and I think that makes me a slightly more lenient star rater. I always try to read critically, but for the most part, if a book is well written and it was enjoyable, I'll rate it fairly highly. I used to be extremely stingy with my 4 or 5 star ratings. Like maybe only the top 5 books I'd ever read ever got 5 stars. But as I've been getting back into reading and trying to read more, I don't think that works for me. I used to really apply the bell curve method to my stars, but for the most part, I don't think that works, just because for a book to get a 3-star book, it needs to be kind of a mediocre book. Like not a bad book, but not a good book. It has to be right in the middle, and I don't think I necessarily read a whole lot of those. What I tend to find that I am reading a lot of, and part of this I think has to do with the fact that I have a very large TBR of books that has been accumulating over, 10 years, and it's been curated over and over again, and the fact that it is still on my TBR is a really good indicator that it is something that I am going to enjoy. So I'm very particular about the books that I do pick up. So I rarely read something that I truly don't like or that's truly mediocre. Most of the books I read are just, they're good. And I would say almost half of them are really good. For me to give something a 5-star rating, it has to be well written. It has to be just overall enjoyable. I have to feel really invested in it, and I prefer to be really wowed by the ending. And that's it. And frankly, quite a few books accomplish these things. Like, they really drag me into the characters. I'm really invested in the characters. They have a good plot. They are well written. And, they kind of wow me at the end. Like, actually, quite a few books fall into that category. Now, all of the books I give 5-star ratings might not be my top 10 favorite books, but they're really good books that in the moment that I read them met all of those requirements, and that were just really, I felt like the time I invested in reading them was really worthwhile. For a book to get a 4-star rating, it has to be well written, but it might fall short in one of those other kind of nebulous categories I gave it. So the ending might not come together perfectly, or the characters, I might not be super invested in the characters. That's the one that usually characterizes 4 stars. Like a 4-star book will usually be really well written, have a good plot, be well paced, have a good ending, but I might not just be like super absorbed into the characters. That's usually what's happening. So a lot of times I give Victoria Schwab, for example, kind of 4-star ratings because she hits all these buttons, but I'm not always super invested in her book. But it's still really good, and the quality of writing is really high. So here's the other thing. I tend to rate books that are really, really well written slightly higher too. Because to me, even if a book isn't perfectly to my taste, if it's well written, if it's doing everything right, I think it's a good product, so it deserves a good rating. I would never rate a book under 3 stars because I didn't understand it, if that makes sense. Or if, for example, everything about it was really well done, well put together, but maybe the setting or the characters, like it was a contemporary that just didn't thrill me, but otherwise it was a really quality book, I'll usually rate it higher. So writing quality is really important to me. Now, a 3-star book is, like I said, it's a mediocre book. It was fine, but there was probably something disjointed about it. Like maybe it dragged. Maybe the pacing was wrong. Maybe the pacing was off. Maybe the ending really didn't come together. Those are usually the things that are going to be like 3-star ratings for me. Once you start hitting the 3 stars and under, it's something's maybe structurally wrong with the book, or thematically wrong with the book. We start to get into these problems that I see with kind of the writing. So a 2-star book, you're either going to have something really, really wrong with the writing or really, really wrong with the content. Let's see, my last 2-star book was Dead After Dark, which is not, I think, a great example of a 2-star read for me, because that book was really, like, content-wise a 1-star book, but I gave it 2 stars because the writing was fine. Like, the writing was reasonably good. I don't want to call it brilliant. I don't want to give it more accolades than it deserves, because it doesn't deserve too many. But it was competent, but I hated everything else. Like, I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the plot. So I got 2 for the writing. So on the flip side, a book could have a 2 because maybe I really liked the characters or the ideas or the themes or something, but the writing is really, really bad. A 1-star book really means I didn't like anything about it. Really means I hated it. And on top, like, I didn't like the characters, I didn't like the plot, I didn't like how it came together, I didn't like the pacing, and on top of that, it was badly written. The other reason a book can get a 1 star is if it's really extremely, like, pervasively offensive. So an example of a book that I recently gave a 1-star review, and this was a couple months ago, but it was Of Fire and Stars by Audrey Coulthurst. I originally gave this book a 2-star, but I had to knock it down to a 1-star, like, the more I thought about it, because it was such a disappointing book. Nothing worked in it. It was really poorly written. The characters were extremely flat. The world was extremely disjointed. The plot was both cliche and slapdash. It was extremely poorly plotted. It was extremely slow and plodding to read. It was a pain to read. So nothing about it really worked. I don't really like the Goodreads whole star rating system. There's just no nuance to it. I prefer using 1/4 star increments and kind of basing it off of like a 10-point scale, right? In my head, at least. I round up for the most part. So if I would give a book 4.5 stars, usually I will give it 5 stars on Goodreads. And then usually the first line of my review will be a note about like my exact star rating. Short story collections. I like to individually rate each short story in a short story collection. And then in my review, I will list out every single short story in that collection, give the individual star rating I gave that book, and then I will do an average for the collection itself. So sometimes my ratings for short story collections are really skewed, but that's because I'm trying to individually look at each individual story and how it stands up on its own. Doing that method, a lot of times you'll get kind of like weird answers like 4.13. So that's, at that moment, that's when I consider my overall feelings about the collection as a whole, deciding whether I want to round up or round down. Does that make sense? Okay. So basically, it's really objective. I'm a little bit easygoing on my star ratings. I'm not super critical unless we start getting into it's just poorly written, poorly constructed, or like radically offensive. That's when I really start being critical. This leads into how do I review. I do 2 different types of videos, and I did not set out to make these 2 different types of videos. I was kind of just thinking, oh, I'll do book reviews. But in the course of doing more of these book reviews, I realized that there's really 2 categories of reviews I do. I do a book review, labeled book review, and I also have a habit of doing a discussion video, and these are 2 different things with 2 slightly different purposes. And I think it's important to kind of discuss those differences. So a book review, the point of a book review is for me to inform potential readers. It's to give them like an overview of what the book is about, to give them kind of like, not a synopsis per se, but like a blurb to let them know key things that they might find interesting or key things they might want to avoid. So I'll talk about like the overarching plot, maybe a little bit about characters, some of the themes in the book, that kind of thing. And then I will talk about the things that I loved and the things that I didn't love. All of these points are intended to help people make an informed decision about whether or not to pick up the book. Because I think that positive or negative reviews doesn't really matter. Different people are gonna like different things. People are gonna like different elements than I do. Something that I don't like might really appeal to them. A trope that I might not like, they might love, and vice versa. And then after I do that kind of information, I like to talk about if you liked blank, then you might like this book. Basically to give them an idea for the sort of things that if they already enjoy them, that's what it reminded me of. And in the course of all of this, I do genuinely try to avoid spoilers because spoilers do not belong in a book review. That's not the place for them. A discussion video, on the other hand, is a dialogue. It's a conversation. it's much more just like a response to the book, not a review. And so generally speaking, I am kind of more aiming them at people who have read the material already and want to talk about it, who want to discuss it. They can contain spoilers. Generally, they will contain spoilers. Actually, I could probably say they will always contain spoilers, because how do you have a dialogue about something if you don't talk about it holistically, right? You can't talk about a book without, like, you can't talk about the themes or the character arc unless you take in the entirety of the book. So there's going to be spoilers. They're usually less structured. They might be a little ranty if I didn't like something about it. And that's usually the thing. Usually a discussion video is me discussing a wildly popular book that I see pretty glaring flaws in, to be honest, because that's what I like to talk about. I kind of like to talk about, why is this thing popular if I don't understand why it's popular? Like, you know, that's just me. That's something I like to watch other people do, and that's something I like to do myself. Another thing about discussion videos is a lot of times I like to contextualize them a little bit more than a review. A review, very much, I am talking about a book singular, or maybe like a series singular, and I am talking about it as itself, as a complete entity. A discussion video, I might be talking and riffing on a book and its place in a canon. For example, my Jane Austen discussion videos, where I talk about multiple Jane Austen books that I have read, I contextualize them against one another. I talk about film adaptations, etc., etc. And I talk about like overarching themes in Austen's entire canon. It's almost like the difference between a structuralist and a post-structuralist discussion of different media. That's kind of how I rate and review things. It's a little loosey-goosey, but that's how I do it, and how I kind of like to do it. And I think that's to explain why I have so many 5-star ratings. I know a lot of people talk about how they used to give a lot of 5-star ratings, and then they started doing BookTube, and they became more critical readers, and they stopped giving out 5-star reviews. And I'm kind of the opposite. Now that I'm reading more, I'm just reading so many things that are like genuinely really good. If a book is just genuinely really good and it works in the moment that I am reading it on all accounts, then I'm not going to withhold a star just because I want to only give stars to the top 1% of books that I've ever read. So I'm a little bit more generous with them because they worked for me. They were great. One of the great things about BookTube is you start watching a lot of booktubers, and you start seeing the books that they really like. And then when you start reading the books that they have really liked or that they haven't liked, and you start seeing your own opinions versus them, it really gives you an idea of like other people's taste. And my taste, there's several booktubers who I really love to watch, and I've picked up books that they have recommended or that they have reviewed, and I've seen them start to review some books that like I have read before, and with very different reactions. And so it like people I thought I had very similar tastes to, it turns out like the more and more I read, the more I realize I don't have the same taste as these people. So you should probably know that my taste in books runs to, I think, the philosophical, the absurd, but maybe let's say the very meta. So I like weird books. I like non-traditional books. I really love speculative books. And I like very, very layered books. So what does this mean? I tend to like books that I see a lot of other people finding difficult, because I like to be made uncomfortable in the book. I like having questions. I like being confused. I like kind of feeling as though I'm in a book, as though I am Alice in Wonderland, running through it with going, where the hell is this gonna end up? And there's nothing so satisfying as getting to the end of this madcap, confusing, disjointed adventure and having a OMG moment. So yeah, I really love weird. I really love layered. I also really love meta. So as soon as you start getting into kind of things representing other things, scenes or characters referencing other things abstractly and with no explanation other than, they exist in the text, I just really love that. I love the things that are unspoken and unexplained, that are just presented to you and left to you to sift through. I love sifting through and pulling on the strings and seeing how things tie together. And I know that's not going to be everyone's jam. If you like weird, complicated books across genres and reading levels, because yeah, I mean, currently I'm reading, middle grade, YA, and adult, then stick around because I'm definitely going to be doing more reviews and discussions in the future. Hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.